The Colorado sun cast harsh shadows across the dusty main street of Silver Creek as Ezra Thompson approached Morrison's general store with leaden steps. His worn boots, resoled twice already this year, kicked up small clouds of dust that seemed to mirror the heaviness in his heart. 3 months had passed since Martha's funeral, and the weight of raising 3 children alone while trying to salvage their failing farm had aged him beyond his 42 years. Inside the store, the familiar smell of leather, tobacco, and coffee beans should have been comforting. Instead, it reminded Ezra of better times when he and Martha would come to town together, her gentle laughter filling the spaces between conversations with neighbors who actually respected them then. Now those same neighbors regarded him with a mixture of pity and contempt that burned worse than the Colorado sun. "Well, well," drawled Vernon Morrison from behind the counter, his substantial belly straining against a vest that had seen better days. "Look what the wind blew in. Come to add more to your tab, Thompson?" Ezra removed his hat, revealing prematurely grey hair that had once been the color of wheat. "Mr. Morrison, I just need a few supplies. Flour, beans, maybe some sugar for the children. I can pay you 50 cents now, and the rest when I sell my cattle next month." A snort of laughter came from near the pickle barrel, where Jake Henley and Bill Crawford were examining harnesses they had no intention of buying. The 2 men, prosperous ranchers, who owned spreads 10 times the size of Ezra's modest 100 acres, had made mocking the struggling widower their favorite afternoon. Entertainment. 50 cents? Henley's voice carried the cruel amusement of a man who had never known real hardship. "Hell, that won't even buy you a pound of flour these days. What makes you think Morrison here wants to extend more credit to a man who can't even keep his fences mended?" Ezra's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "My fences are fine, Mr. Henley, and I always pay my debts, just sometimes it takes longer than I'd like." "Sometimes?" Crawford joined in, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Thompson, you've been saying next month for 3 months running. Face facts, you're broke, your farm's failing, and those kids of yours would be better off in an orphanage where they might actually get regular meals." The words hit Ezra like physical blows. He thought of 8-year-old Samuel, who tried so, or to be the man of the house since his father was clearly failing at the job. Of 6-year-old Rebecca, who still cried for her mama every night. Of little David, barely 4, who didn't understand why Papa looked so sad all the time. "My children are fine," Ezra said quietly, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Morrison leaned forward on his elbows, enjoying the spectacle. "Are they, though? I heard from Mrs. Patterson that your boy Samuel was caught stealing apples from her tree last week. Said he looked thin as a rail." Heat flooded Ezra's cheeks. Samuel hadn't told him about the apples, probably knowing his father would feel even worse about their situation. "I'll speak to Mrs. Patterson and make it right." "With what?" Henley laughed harshly. "You planning to pay her in promises too?" "Maybe he could trade her some of that pride he's always carrying around," Crawford added, "though I reckon pride don't feed children or fix broken-down farms." Ezra's hands clenched into fists at his sides. These men had wives, hired hands, full, barns and cattle herds that numbered in the hundreds. They had never lain awake at night, wondering how they would feed their children the next day, never had to choose between buying medicine for a sick child or seed for the spring planting. "Gentlemen," Morrison said with mock formality, "I think we're being too hard on poor Ezra here. After all, he's doing his best." The storekeeper's tone made it clear that Ezra's best was nowhere near good enough. "Tell you what, Thompson, I'll extend your credit another week, but I want something as collateral this time." "Collateral?" Ezra's voice was barely a whisper. "That pocket watch of yours." Morrison pointed to the silver timepiece that had belonged to Ezra's father. "It's the only thing of value you've got left, near as I can tell." The watch had been a wedding gift from Martha, engraved with their wedding date and the words, "Time stands still for love." It was the last tangible connection he had to her, besides their children. "I can't do that, Mr. Morrison. That watch is just a piece of metal," Henley interrupted. "Your dead wife ain't coming back, Thompson. Time to stop living in the past and face reality." The casual cruelty of the words about Martha nearly broke Ezra's composure entirely. His vision blurred with tears he refused to shed in front of these men, and his hand moved instinctively to the watch chain across his vest. "Maybe," Crawford said with a particularly nasty smile, "you should consider selling that farm of yours to someone who can actually work it proper. I might be interested in the land, though I'd have to tear down that shack you call a house." "That's not a shack," Ezra said with quiet dignity. "I built that house with my own hands. My children were born in that house, and they'll die of starvation in it if you keep being too proud to accept reality," Morrison said bluntly. "Look around you, Thompson. You're wearing clothes that are more patches than original fabric. Your boots have holes in them, and you smell like you ain't had a proper bath in weeks. This ain't pride, it's just foolishness." The accusations stung because they contained grains of truth. Ezra had been so focused on keeping the farm running and caring for his children that he had neglected his own appearance. His clothes were indeed patched and repatched, though they were clean. His boots did have holes, though he'd tried to repair them with tar and scraps of leather. "I work hard," Ezra said, his voice gaining strength. "I may not have money, but I work from dawn to dusk every day trying to provide for my children." "That has to count for something, does it?" Henley asked mockingly. "Because from where I'm standing, all that hard work ain't amounted to much. Your cattle are skin and bones, your crops are failing, and your children are growing up thinking poverty is normal." "At least I'm trying," Ezra shot back, his composure finally cracking. "At least I'm not sitting in a store all afternoon making fun of a man who's doing his best with what he's got." The three men exchanged glances, and Ezra realized he'd made a mistake. Their expressions hardened, and the casual cruelty transformed into something more deliberate and vicious. "Your best?" Morrison's voice was ice-cold. "Your best got your wife killed, Thompson. If you'd been able to afford a real doctor instead of that old drunk Doc Patterson, maybe she'd still be alive." The words hit Ezra like a physical assault. The guilt he carried about Martha's death, the knowledge that he'd waited too long to seek help because he couldn't afford it, the certainty that a better man would have found a way to save her, came rushing back with overwhelming force. "That's enough," Ezra whispered, his face pale as winter snow. "Is it?" Crawford moved closer, sensing weakness. "Maybe if you'd spent less time playing farmer and more time making real money, your children would still have a mother. Maybe I said that's enough." The voice that cut through the store's atmosphere was quiet, but carried such authority that all four men turned toward its source. Near the fabric counter stood a man none of them had noticed enter. Tall, impeccably dressed, in a black suit that probably cost more than Ezra made in a year, with silver hair and eyes the color of winter sky. The stranger's presence filled the store completely, though he hadn't raised his voice or made any threatening gestures. There was something about him that spoke of power and wealth, but also of a man who had earned both through his own efforts rather than inheriting them. "Excuse me," Morrison sputtered, clearly off balance. "This is a private conversation, mister. Ain't none of your business." The stranger's gaze moved slowly from Morrison to Henley to Crawford, and Ezra saw all three men unconsciously step backward. Under that steady stare, "Actually," the stranger said calmly, "I believe it became my business the moment you started attacking a man's character based on circumstances beyond his control." He moved closer to the group, his expensive boots clicking softly on the wooden floor. "I was raised to believe that kicking a man when he's down says more about the character of the person doing the kicking than it does about the man on the ground." Henley tried to assert himself. "Now look here, whoever you are—" "Marcus Whitfield," the stranger said simply. The name hit the store like a thunderclap. Even Ezra, isolated as he'd been, recognized it. Marcus Whitfield owned the railroad that had brought prosperity to Silver Creek. He owned the largest ranch in 3 counties, controlled the territorial bank, and had business interests from Denver to San Francisco. He was easily the most powerful man within 500 miles. Morrison's face went white. "Mr. Whitfield, sir, we didn't know you were, that is, we were just what?" Whitfield's voice remained conversational, but there was steel underneath. Just humiliating a man for having the misfortune to lose his wife? Just mocking him for working hard despite overwhelming odds? Just suggesting that his children would be better off as orphans? The silence that followed was deafening. Ezra found himself staring at this unexpected champion, hardly believing that Marcus Whitfield, a man whose name was spoken with reverence throughout the territory, was defending him against his tormentors. "Sometimes," Whitfield continued, his gaze never leaving the 3 men, "I think we lose sight of what really matters in this life. Success, wealth, comfort, they're all fine things, but they mean nothing if we lose our basic human decency along the way." Crawford cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Whitfield, you don't understand the situation here. Thompson's been running up debts all over town, making promises he can't keep." "And has he broken any of those promises?" Whitfield asked sharply. "Well, no, but has he stolen anything, cheated anyone, lied about his circumstances?" "No, sir, but then what exactly is his crime?" Whitfield's voice grew colder. "Working hard, loving his children, trying to honor his wife's memory by keeping his family together. If those are crimes, gentlemen, then we're all in serious trouble." Ezra felt tears sting his eyes, not from shame this time, but from gratitude. For 3 months he'd felt completely alone in his struggles. Now, suddenly, he had an ally he'd never expected. "Mr. Thompson," Whitfield turned to address Ezra directly, "I believe you came here to purchase supplies for your children. Perhaps you'd allow me to assist with that transaction." Ezra's pride warred with his desperation. His children needed food, and winter was coming. But accepting charity from a stranger, even one as powerful as Marcus Whitfield, felt like another kind of defeat. "Sir, I appreciate your kindness, but I can't accept you're not accepting charity," Whitfield said firmly. "You're accepting help from someone who understands that even the strongest man sometimes needs assistance. There's a difference, Mr. Thompson. A very important difference." As the late afternoon sun slanted through the store's windows, Ezra Thompson stood at a crossroads that would change not only his life, but the life of the most powerful man in Colorado. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment would reveal secrets that had been buried for 20 years, and would prove that sometimes the greatest redemption comes not from helping others, but from allowing others to help us. The Colorado evening painted the sky in shades of amber and crimson as Marcus Whitfield's private carriage rolled toward the Thompson farm. Ezra sat uncomfortably on the plush leather seat, still overwhelmed by the day's events. The wealthy railroad magnate had not only paid for Ezra's supplies at Morrison's store, but had also quietly settled his outstanding debt, with a warning to the storekeeper that any future mistreatment of the Thompson family would result in serious consequences. "Mr. Whitfield," Ezra began hesitantly, "I still don't understand why you helped me back there. We've never met before, and I'm nobody special." Marcus adjusted his gold pocket watch, a gesture that seemed both habitual and somehow pained. "Mr. Thompson, every man deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of his circumstances. What I witnessed today was cruelty masquerading as moral superiority. The carriage hit a rut in the dirt road, jostling both men. Through the window, Ezra could see his modest farmhouse coming into view. Even in the golden evening light, he couldn't help but notice how shabby it looked compared to the grand estates he'd glimpsed during their journey. Properties that undoubtedly belonged to Marcus Whitfield. Besides, Marcus continued, his voice carrying an odd note, I have my own reasons for wanting to help your family. Before Ezra could ask what those reasons might be, the sound of children's laughter reached their ears. Samuel, Rebecca, and little David were playing in the yard, chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. They stopped abruptly when the elegant carriage pulled up to their gate, staring with wide eyes at the unexpected visitors. "Papa!" Rebecca ran toward Ezra as he climbed down from the carriage, her blonde curls bouncing. "You were gone so long. We were worried." Ezra swept his daughter into his arms, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine that always clung to her hair. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I had some business in town that took longer than expected." Samuel approached more cautiously, his 8-year-old mind already trying to process the significance of his father arriving in such an expensive conveyance. The boy had inherited his mother's serious nature and his father's deep brown eyes, and those eyes now studied Marcus Whitfield with intense curiosity. "Children," Ezra said, setting Rebecca down, "I'd like you to meet Mr. Whitfield. He was very kind to us today." Marcus stepped forward, removing his hat with the same courtly gesture he might use when meeting a governor's wife. "It's an honor to meet you all. Your father speaks of you constantly. David, barely 4, and still fearless in the way of small." Children walked right up to Marcus and stared up at him. "Are you rich?" he asked with devastating directness. "David!" Ezra's face flushed with embarrassment. "That's not polite to ask." But Marcus laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his entire face. "It's quite all right. Yes, young man, I suppose I am rich. But you know what I've learned? The richest man is the one who has people who love him." He glanced meaningfully at Ezra and his children. "By that measure, I suspect your father is wealthier than I am." Rebecca giggled at this idea, while Samuel continued his solemn assessment of their visitor. The boy had been forced to grow up too quickly since Martha's death, taking on responsibilities that would have been challenging for someone twice his age. "Would you like to come inside?" Ezra offered, though he immediately worried about the state of their modest home. "I'm afraid it's not much, but I'd be honored," Marcus said simply. The interior of the Thompson house was indeed humble compared to the mansions Marcus was accustomed to, but it was spotlessly clean and filled with the warmth that comes from being truly loved. Hand-sewn quilts covered the furniture, children's drawings decorated the walls, and the scent of fresh bread still lingered from the morning's baking. Marcus's attention was immediately drawn to the mantelpiece, where a small collection of photographs sat in simple wooden frames. Most were family portraits, but one in particular made him pause. It showed a young woman with gentle eyes and a smile that seemed to light up her entire face. "That's our mama," Rebecca said softly, noticing Marcus's interest. "She went to heaven, but Papa says she's still watching over us." "She was beautiful," Marcus said, and Ezra was surprised by the thickness in the older man's voice. "What was her name?" "Martha," Ezra replied. "Martha Elizabeth Thompson. She died of fever 3 months ago." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the photograph with an intensity that seemed out of proportion to polite interest. When he finally turned away, Ezra thought he saw moisture in the man's eyes. "Mr. Whitfield, are you all right?" "Quite all right," Marcus said quickly, but his composure had clearly been shaken. "It's just, she reminds me of someone I knew long ago." Samuel, who had been listening to every word with the sharp attention of a child who had learned to read adult emotions, stepped forward. "Did you know our mama?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Marcus looked at the boy for a long moment, then at Ezra, then back at the photograph on the mantelpiece. "No," he said finally. "No, I didn't know your mother, but she does remind me very much of my sister." Ezra sensed there was more to the story, but before he could pursue it, Rebecca tugged on Marcus's expensive coat sleeve. "Are you going to stay for supper?" she asked hopefully. Papa makes good cornbread, and we have beans and ham from the pig we butchered last month. Marcus looked to Ezra, who nodded. You're more than welcome, Mr. Whitfield. It's the least I can do after your kindness today. During the simple but hearty meal, Marcus seemed to transform from the intimidating railroad magnate into something approaching a normal man. He listened with genuine interest as the children chatted about their daily activities, praised Rebecca's help with the cooking, and engaged Samuel in a serious discussion about the boys' plans to expand their vegetable garden next spring. You know, Marcus said as Ezra served coffee after the children had been sent to bed, I could use someone with farming experience to manage some of my agricultural interests. Someone who understands the land and isn't afraid of hard work. Ezra nearly choked on his coffee. Mr. Whitfield, I appreciate the thought, but I'm hardly qualified to manage anything. I can barely keep my own small farm running. Can't you? Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Ezra with those penetrating blue eyes. From what I observed today, you're feeding 3 children, maintaining a clean and comfortable home, and working land that would challenge men with far more resources. That seems like excellent management to me. But your operations must be huge, complex. They are. Which is exactly why I need someone who understands that success isn't measured only in dollars, but in taking care of the people who depend on you. Marcus paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. I've been watching this county for some time, Mr. Thompson. I know which men cut corners to increase profits, which ones treat their workers fairly, and which ones have honor, even when no one is watching. You fall into the last category. Ezra felt overwhelmed by the praise. How could you possibly know that about me? Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it contained answers to questions he'd been carrying for years. Because, he said finally, 22 years ago, I knew a young man who reminded me very much of you. He was honorable, hard-working, and devoted to his family. He was also my business partner in a small freight operation we ran between Denver and the mining camps. Ezra waited, sensing that Marcus was approaching something important. His name was James Sullivan, Marcus continued. He was married to the most wonderful woman I'd ever met, kind, gentle, beautiful inside and out. She treated me like the brother she'd never had, and Marcus's voice grew rough with emotion. I was in love with her, though I never told either of them. The coffee in Ezra's cup had grown cold as he listened to this unexpected confession. James and Elizabeth, that was her name, Elizabeth, they were planning to start a family, expand the business, build a real life together. Then came the winter of 1863. We'd taken on a contract to deliver supplies to a mining camp up in the high country, despite warnings about early blizzards. Marcus stood and walked to the window, though the darkness outside revealed nothing. I should have listened to those warnings, should have insisted we wait until spring, but the money was good, and I was young and arrogant and thought I could conquer anything. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The blizzard caught us 2 days out from the camp. James died trying to save our horses when they broke through the ice on a frozen creek. Elizabeth died 3 months later in childbirth. The baby, a little girl, lived only 2 days. Ezra felt his heart clench with sympathy for this man's long-carried guilt. Mr. Whitfield, that wasn't your fault. Weather, accidents, childbirth complications, those things happen regardless of, don't they? Marcus turned back to face him. If I hadn't pushed for that contract, if I hadn't been so eager to prove myself, James would still be alive. Elizabeth would have had her husband with her when the baby came. That little girl might have lived. The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared understanding of loss and regret. Is that why you helped me today? Ezra asked gently. Because I remind you of your friend? Marcus nodded slowly. When I saw those men mocking you for being poor, for struggling to care for your children after losing your wife, It was like watching history repeat itself, like seeing James being punished for circumstances beyond his control. "But you said my wife reminded you of your sister." I lied. Marcus's admission was quiet but firm. "She reminded me of Elizabeth. The same gentle eyes, the same sweet smile. When your daughter said her mother's name was Martha Elizabeth..." He shook his head. "It felt like a sign, like maybe I'd been given a chance to do right by someone when I failed so completely before." Ezra absorbed this revelation, understanding now why Marcus Whitfield, one of the most powerful men in Colorado, had intervened on behalf of a struggling farmer he'd never met. "Mr. Whitfield," Ezra said carefully, "helping my family won't bring them back." "I know." Marcus returned to his chair, looking older and more vulnerable than he had all day. "But maybe it will help me sleep at night without seeing their faces. Maybe it will prove that their deaths meant something, that the lessons I learned from losing them can help someone else." As the evening wound down and Marcus prepared to leave, Ezra found himself facing a decision that would affect not only his own future, but the future of his children. The job offer was real, and it represented security they desperately needed. But accepting it would mean accepting charity from a man driven by guilt over deaths that occurred before Ezra was even born. "Think about my offer," Marcus said as his carriage arrived. "You don't have to give me an answer tonight, but consider this. Sometimes the greatest kindness we can show someone is allowing them to help us. Sometimes being saved is less important than doing the saving." As the wealthy man's carriage disappeared into the darkness, Ezra stood in his doorway, wondering if redemption was truly possible, and whether some debts could only be paid forward, rather than back. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus Whitfield's unexpected intervention at Morrison's general store, and the entire dynamic of Silver Creek had shifted like sand in a windstorm. Ezra Thompson found himself at the center of a transformation he neither sought nor fully understood, as the most powerful man in Colorado Territory had apparently decided to make the struggling farmer his personal project. The changes began small but accumulated with startling speed. A delivery of premium seed arrived at the Thompson farm with a note explaining that it was surplus from one of Whitfield's agricultural operations. A crew of workers appeared to repair the barn roof, claiming they'd been in the area anyway and had orders to fix any structural problems they encountered. Most significantly, 3 of Ezra's cattle, thin and sickly from poor grazing, mysteriously disappeared one night, only to be replaced by 6 healthy head of prime beef stock. "Papa," Samuel said as they watched the new cattle graze in their improved pasture, "why is Mr. Whitfield being so nice to us?" It was a question Ezra had been asking himself daily. The 8-year-old boy had inherited his mother's intuitive understanding of people, and he sensed the complex undercurrents flowing beneath Marcus's generosity. "Sometimes, son," Ezra replied carefully, "people help others because they need to, not just because they want to. Mr. Whitfield is a good man who's carrying some heavy burdens." "Like when you carry me when I'm too tired to walk," Ezra smiled at his son's simple wisdom. "Exactly like that. Sometimes grown-ups need to be carried too, even if they're doing the carrying." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus's carriage, a sight that had become almost routine over the past weeks. Today, however, the railroad magnate wasn't alone. A distinguished-looking man in a lawyer's suit sat beside him, clutching a leather portfolio with the intensity of someone guarding state secrets. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus called as he stepped down from the carriage, "I'd like you to meet Benjamin Crawford, my attorney. Ben, this is Ezra Thompson, the man I've been telling you about." Crawford extended his hand with professional courtesy, but Ezra caught the slight hesitation, the quick assessment that marked him as someone of limited means and importance. It was a look he'd grown accustomed to over the past months. "Mr. Crawford," Ezra shook the lawyer's hand firmly, "what brings you gentlemen out to my humble farm today?" Marcus and Crawford exchanged glances, and Ezra felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in his stomach. In his experience, lawyers brought complications, and complications usually meant trouble for people like him. "Perhaps we could discuss this inside," Marcus suggested. "What I have to propose is rather significant." They settled around Ezra's kitchen table, the same one where Marcus had shared that simple meal weeks earlier. Crawford opened his portfolio and withdrew several documents, spreading them across the worn wooden surface with the precision of a man accustomed to life-changing paperwork. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus began, his voice carrying an unusual formality, "I want to offer you a business proposition, not charity, not a handout, but a genuine partnership opportunity." Ezra's eyes moved from Marcus's face to the documents, trying to process words that seemed too large for his small kitchen. "What kind of partnership?" Crawford cleared his throat and pointed to the first document. "Mr. Whitfield is proposing to establish the Thompson-Whitfield Agricultural Development Company. You would hold a 49% stake in the operation, with Mr. Whitfield holding 51%. The numbers swam before Ezra's eyes. "I don't understand. I don't have money to invest in anything, let alone a partnership with—" "Your investment wouldn't be monetary," Marcus interrupted. "You'd be contributing your land, your farming expertise, and your management skills. I'd be providing capital, equipment, and access to markets." Ezra studied the papers, though the legal language might as well have been written in ancient Greek. "How much land are we talking about?" "Initially, your current 100 acres plus the adjoining 1,000 acres to the north and east," Crawford explained. "Mr. Whitfield owns that land currently, but it would be transferred to the partnership." 1,100 acres. Ezra's voice cracked slightly. That's a major operation. I've never managed anything close to that size." "But you understand the fundamentals," Marcus said earnestly. "Soil composition, crop rotation, animal husbandry, weather patterns. You have instincts that can't be taught, Ezra. I've watched you work your land these past weeks, seen how you maximize every acre despite limited resources." Ezra looked up from the documents, studying Marcus's face. "This is about your friend. James, isn't it? The partner you lost." Marcus didn't deny it. "Partially, but it's also about good business sense. I need someone I can trust to manage my agricultural interests, someone who understands that land isn't just an asset to be exploited, but a legacy to be preserved." Crawford shuffled through more papers. "The financial projections are quite favorable. Mr. Thompson, based on current market prices and the productivity improvements Mr. Whitfield's capital investment would enable, the partnership should generate substantial profits within 3 years." "How substantial?" Ezra asked, though part of him was afraid to hear the answer. "Enough to provide financial security for your children's future," Marcus said simply. "Enough to ensure they never face the kind of hardship you've endured these past months." The promise hung in the air like morning mist, beautiful and insubstantial. Ezra thought of Samuel's serious eyes, always worried about adult concerns no child should carry. Of Rebecca's faded dresses, carefully mended but obviously outgrown. Of little David's innocent questions about why they couldn't afford toys like other children. "There's something else," Crawford added, producing another document. "Mr. Whitfield is also proposing to establish an educational trust for your children, full funding for their schooling through university level, if they choose to pursue higher." Education. Ezra's hands trembled as he reached for the paper. A college education for his children had been a dream so far beyond his reach that he'd stopped allowing himself to consider it. Now this man was offering to make it reality. Why? Ezra's voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you do all this?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the improved pasture where healthy cattle grazed under the Colorado sun. 22 years ago, he said finally, I made decisions that cost good people their lives. I've spent every day since then building wealth and power, telling myself it would somehow balance the scales. But money can't bring back the dead, Ezra. It can't erase the past or quiet the voices that whisper in the dark about what might have been. He turned back to face Ezra directly. But maybe it can prevent other good people from suffering unnecessarily. Maybe it can give children opportunities their parents never had. Maybe it can prove that James and Elizabeth's deaths taught me something valuable about what really matters in this world. Crawford looked uncomfortable with the emotional turn of the conversation, but Marcus seemed beyond caring about professional decorum. I'm not offering you charity, Ezra. I'm offering you a chance to help me find redemption. Your success would be my success. Your children's future would be my legacy. It's the closest thing to resurrection I'm likely to achieve in this lifetime. Ezra studied the documents again, though his vision was blurred by tears he couldn't quite suppress. The offers were generous beyond belief, life-changing in ways he could barely comprehend. But accepting them would mean acknowledging that he couldn't provide for his family on his own, that his pride was less important than his children's welfare. I need time to think, he said finally. Of course, Marcus nodded. This is a significant decision. Take all the time you need. As the two men prepared to leave, Crawford paused at the door. Mr. Thompson, if I may offer some advice, I've worked with Mr. Whitfield for 15 years. He's the most honorable man I've ever known, and his business instincts are extraordinary. This partnership isn't just charity disguised as commerce. It's a genuine opportunity that could benefit both of you enormously. After they left, Ezra sat alone at his kitchen table, surrounded by papers that could transform his family's entire future. Outside, he could hear his children playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze like a promise of better days ahead. But with the promise came questions that gnawed at him like persistent hunger. Could he accept such overwhelming generosity without losing his self-respect? Could he build a future on another man's guilt? And most importantly, what would Martha have wanted him to do? As darkness settled over the farm, Ezra realized that the hardest decisions weren't always between right and wrong. Sometimes they were between two different kinds of right, and choosing one meant abandoning the other forever. The weight of that choice pressed down on him like the Colorado sky itself, vast and inescapable and somehow beautiful in its terrible responsibility. The autumn harvest moon hung low over Silver Creek as Ezra Thompson stood in what was now the main office of Thompson Whitfield Agricultural Development Company, reviewing the books that showed their first year's remarkable success. The partnership had exceeded even Marcus's optimistic projections, transforming not only Ezra's modest farm, but the entire economic landscape of the county. Through the window, he could see the lights of the new worker housing Marcus had built for the expanded operations employees. 20 families now depended on the partnership for their livelihoods. The sight filled Ezra with a pride different from anything he'd experienced as a solitary farmer struggling to survive. "Papa?" Rebecca's voice called from the adjoining schoolroom where she'd been working on her lessons. At 7, she was already reading at a level that would have been advanced for children twice her age, thanks to the private tutoring Marcus had arranged. "Yes, sweetheart. Is Mr. Whitfield coming for dinner again tonight? I made him a drawing of our new house." Ezra smiled, thinking of the comfortable home Marcus had insisted on building for the Thompson family. Not a mansion, but a solid, spacious house with separate bedrooms for each child and modern conveniences like indoor plumbing and a proper kitchen stove. "He'll be here," Ezra confirmed. "He never misses Sunday dinner with us." It had become their weekly tradition, this gathering around the Thompson family table. What had started as a business relationship had evolved into something deeper. Not quite family, but closer than mere friendship. Marcus had become Uncle Marcus to the children, and while Ezra still sometimes felt the weight of their unusual arrangement, he'd come to value the older man's counsel and genuine affection for his family. The sound of horses approaching drew Ezra's attention back to the present. Marcus arrived precisely at 6, as he had every Sunday for the past year, but tonight something seemed different. The railroad magnate's usual confident demeanor appeared strained, and he carried himself with the careful control of a man bearing difficult news. Uncle Marcus, David, now 5 and fearless, ran to greet their guest with the enthusiasm only small children could muster. "Look what I can do." The boy proceeded to demonstrate a handstand he'd been practicing all week. Marcus's smile was genuine but subdued as he praised David's achievement. During dinner, Ezra noticed that their guest was unusually quiet, responding to the children's chatter with distracted politeness rather than his typical engaged interest. After the children had been sent to bed, Marcus and Ezra sat on the front porch, watching fireflies dance in the warm evening air. The silence stretched between them, comfortable but weighted with unspoken concerns. "There's something I need to tell you," Marcus said finally, his voice carrying a gravity that made Ezra's stomach tighten with apprehension. "What is it?" Marcus pulled out a telegram, its edges worn from handling. "I received this yesterday. The territorial legislature is planning to investigate several large business operations for what they're calling monopolistic practices. Our partnership is on their list." Ezra felt the familiar cold wash of fear he'd experienced so often during his months of poverty. "What does that mean for us, for the children?" "Probably nothing," Marcus said quickly, seeing Ezra's distress. "These political investigations are usually more about lawmakers looking important than actual wrongdoing. But," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "there's something else. The investigation has stirred up old questions about my past. Business dealings, including the freight company I operated with James Sullivan." The mention of Marcus's long-dead partner sent a chill through Ezra. Over the past year, he'd learned more about the tragic story that had shaped Marcus's life, but he sensed there were still details his partner hadn't shared. "What kind of questions?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Ezra began to wonder if he would answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Questions about whether the blizzard that killed James was really an accident. Questions about whether I might have arranged for certain problems to eliminate my competition." The words hit Ezra like a physical blow. "Marcus, that's impossible. You loved James like a brother. You've spent 20 years carrying guilt over his death." "Have I?" Marcus's laugh was bitter and self-deprecating. "Or have I spent 20 years trying to convince myself that guilt was justified, that I deserved to suffer for what happened?" Ezra stared at his partner, trying to process what he was hearing. "What are you saying?" Marcus stood and walked to the porch railing, gripping it with white knuckles. "I'm saying that maybe my guilt has been misplaced all these years. Maybe I've been torturing myself over an accident because it was easier than facing the real reason I've never been able to forgive myself, which is that I was relieved when James died." The confession came out in a rush, as if Marcus had been holding it back for decades. Not immediately, not consciously, but somewhere deep down, I was relieved that Elizabeth was finally free, that maybe, eventually, she might turn to me for comfort. Ezra felt his world tilt slightly. The man he'd come to respect and trust was revealing depths of complexity he'd never suspected. "But she died too," Ezra said softly. "She did. And with her died any possibility that my hidden hopes might be realized. I was left with nothing but the knowledge that I'd harbored feelings for my best friend's wife, and that some dark part of me had seen opportunity in his death." Marcus turned back to face Ezra, his expression haunted. "I've spent 20 years telling myself I was guilty of causing James's death, when the truth is much simpler and much worse. I was guilty of betraying him in my heart, long before the blizzard ever came. The confession hung between them, like a bridge neither man was sure they wanted to cross. Ezra thought of his own marriage to Martha, of the complete trust and love they'd shared, and tried to imagine how he would feel learning that a close friend had harbored romantic feelings for his wife. "Does this change anything between us?" Marcus asked, his voice vulnerable in a way Ezra had never heard before. Ezra considered the question seriously. This man had saved his family from destitution, had given his children a future, had treated them all with genuine affection and respect. "Could past sins of the heart erase present acts of kindness? I don't know," Ezra answered honestly. "I need time to think about what you've told me." Marcus nodded, accepting the response without argument. "I understand. And I want you to know that regardless of what you decide about our personal relationship, the business partnership and the children's educational trust are legally binding. Your family's security isn't dependent on your opinion of my character." "That's not what this is about," Ezra said firmly. "This is about trust, about knowing who I'm working with, who I'm allowing into my children's lives." "I know, and you have every right to question that. I needed you to know the truth. I'm tired of carrying secrets, tired of building relationships on foundations of lies, even lies of omission." As Marcus prepared to leave, Samuel appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Uncle Marcus, are you going already?" The boy's innocent question highlighted the complexity of their situation. Samuel, Rebecca, and David had come to love Marcus as family. Could Ezra deny them that relationship because of romantic feelings the man had harbored for a woman who had been dead for over 20 years? "I'll be back next Sunday, son," Marcus promised, though his eyes sought Ezra's for confirmation. After Marcus left, Ezra sat alone on his porch, weighing the revelation against everything he knew about the man who had transformed his family's life. The success of their partnership was undeniable. They employed dozens of workers. Their agricultural innovations were being studied by farming operations across the territory, and the children's future was secure in ways Ezra could never have provided alone. But beyond the material benefits, Marcus had given them something equally valuable: genuine affection and care. He remembered Rebecca's excitement when Marcus had attended her school program, David's pride when the older man had praised his reading progress, Samuel's serious discussions with Marcus about agricultural techniques and business principles. 3 days later, Ezra made his decision. He found Marcus in his Denver office, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and power that somehow seemed less impressive now that Ezra understood the loneliness they concealed. "I've thought about what you told me," Ezra said without preamble. Marcus looked up from his desk, his expression carefully neutral. "And I think you've been punishing yourself for being human, for having feelings you couldn't control and never acted upon. James never knew about your feelings for Elizabeth, did he?" "No, never. And you never did anything to interfere with their marriage or their happiness?" "Never. I would have died first." Ezra sat down across from Marcus, studying the man who had become such an important part of his family's life. "Then what exactly are you guilty of? Loving someone you couldn't have? Feeling a moment of hope when tragedy struck? Those aren't sins, Marcus. They're just the messy, complicated emotions that make us human." Marcus's eyes filled with tears he'd probably been holding back for decades. "But I built my relationship with your family on that guilt. I helped you because I was trying to atone for sins that existed more in my imagination than in reality." "So," Ezra shrugged, "does it matter why you helped us? Does it change the fact that you saved us when we needed saving? Does it make the children's laughter less genuine or their love for you less real?" "I suppose not," Marcus admitted slowly. "The investigation will pass," Ezra continued. Politicians need villains to stay in office, but they also need successful businesses to keep their territories prosperous. Our operation provides jobs, pays taxes, and contributes to the community. That matters more than old gossip about a tragedy that happened 20 years ago. Marcus straightened in his chair, and Ezra saw some of the old confidence returning to his demeanor. You're right, of course. I've been so focused on past guilt that I lost sight of present realities. Besides, Ezra added with a slight smile, I can't afford to lose my business partner now. Rebecca's already talking about studying law when she goes to college, and David wants to be a railroad engineer. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to educate children with such ambitious dreams? Marcus laughed, the sound filling his opulent office with warmth it had probably never known. Extremely expensive. Fortunately, I happen to know someone in the railroad business who might be able to arrange internships. As autumn deepened into winter, the territorial investigation proved to be exactly what Marcus had predicted, a political theater that generated more noise than substance. The Thompson-Whitfield partnership not only survived the scrutiny, but emerged stronger, with several state officials publicly praising their innovative agricultural techniques and fair labor practices. More importantly, the crisis had forced both men to confront the emotional foundations of their relationship. What had begun as Marcus's attempt at atonement had evolved into genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to the family they both loved. On Christmas morning, as Ezra watched his children open gifts that would have been impossible during their months of poverty, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment of security and happiness. Sometimes redemption didn't require grand gestures or perfect motivations. Sometimes it was as simple as one imperfect person helping another and allowing both to heal in the process. Outside, snow was falling gently over the Colorado landscape, covering their prosperous farm in pristine white. It was a new beginning, built on the foundation of old sorrows, transformed into present joy. Marcus had found his redemption not in erasing the past, but in embracing a future where past mistakes could become the seeds of wisdom and compassion. And Ezra had learned that accepting help didn't diminish a man's dignity. It simply recognized that dignity itself was often a collaborative effort, built by communities of people who chose to care for one another. As the children's laughter filled the warm house, both men understood that some debts could only be repaid by paying them forward, and that the greatest wealth was not measured in dollars, but in the love and trust shared between families, however unconventionally they might be formed. The merchants' honor had been restored, not through individual effort alone, but through the recognition that true honor lay in allowing others to help carry life's burdens and in using one's own strength to lighten the load for those who would come after.